Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about dating red flags if you're chronically ill. Now, I did do a video a long time ago on dating and chronic illness. I probably should do a new video sometime soon because, things are different, especially as you get older. And that video is pretty old. I don't even remember when I made it, but I still do get some comments on that video. But I want to talk about some red flags, and I actually didn't make like a huge list. These are just things that I noticed recently. If you saw my life update that should be posted before this video, I talked about how I did a little bit of dating at the end of last year, so at the end of 2023. Since I moved out on my own. I did a little bit of dating, and it went the way that it went, right? But there were some things that I did notice. It was kind of interesting because, everybody's different, but, the game has changed. The first time I went back to dating was after my divorce. I've been divorced for about 10 years. So a couple years after I got divorced, that's when I hopped on Tinder and all of those dating apps. And Tinder, I think, was relatively new at the time. And I never had any luck. I had very, very little luck with any dating apps. I found people to be very rude or just not really serious about meeting up. So I thought it was going to be the same. So I basically kind of just got on these apps out of boredom. But I had much better luck this time around. I mean, I was getting date after date after date. And I mean, these weren't real dates, just meeting for coffee or something like that, meeting at a coffee shop, just chat and get a feel for each other and, and that kind of thing. And, I had much better luck this time. I can't say that all these people were bad, but there were some things that I noticed and some red flags. There are the obvious red flags, and I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about things specific to someone that has a chronic condition, because they're going to be a bit different than, if you're healthy and, all of the red flags that apply to healthy people are going to apply to us. But we have some extra ones that we need to look out for. So dating while you're sick can be challenging, but it's not impossible. I went on a few dates not feeling well at all. I've been having stomach issues, bloating, dyspepsia for over a year now. It's just been ongoing, and I've also been having recurrent infections. And I was like, you know what? I have to learn to. I'm either just not going to date at all, or I'm going to have to learn to date with this discomfort. And so part of this was to challenge myself to see if I could kind of push through the discomfort and still be able to have just a simple, coffee date and chit chat. Sadly, we are already at a disadvantage. We're at great risk of abuse because we have a disability. We're at risk of being taken advantage of. So, we have to be extra careful. We have to be extra intelligent, and observant in order to screen carefully and look for red flags before we get serious or move forward with someone. So this is the stuff that I noticed on some of these dates. On my Tinder profile, I was able to put, I'm chronically ill. I just put that I'm chronically ill, but, I don't really say much else. I don't give details. I just say I'm chronically ill. I do state that I'm financially stable because I feel like a lot of guys will assume that I'm looking for a caregiver or a sugar daddy. So I just put, chronically ill, financially stable, like you don't need to worry about it, relax. So I was very surprised. The first time around when, years ago when I went on Tinder, I had a lot of guys, their favorite question to ask was, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's your problem? Like, men were very rude about it, very nasty. And there were some that just unmatch. As soon as they know that you have a chronic illness, unmatch. And I completely respect someone who does not want to date a person with a chronic condition. I get it. I'm never going to insist. I'm never going to say I'm being discriminated against. They have every right not to date me because I have a condition. It's better than being led on. And I also have every right not to date them for being idiots. So we have a right to reject people for whatever reason we want. So that's just the disclaimer that I want to put on here. So number one, these are the red flags. They insist that you can still work or do something, right? If you're going to be home all day, you need to learn how to cook. I had a guy actually tell me that. If you're home all day, you should learn how to cook. You should be able to clean. You should be able to do this. Or, you know, one guy that I went out on a date with, I told him that I went to film school. And so he was like, you should still be able to do something, right? Like you could write, you could do this, you could do that. And, you know, I don't get into specifics of my condition unless I'm asked. So they don't really know the limitations that I have. And my limitations also change and they grow as the years go on. So I just was like, you know, I just tried to kind of either change the subject or answer the question as briefly as I can and then move along. And sometimes if they're nice enough, they will drop it. But that, you know, if somebody insists or they say like, you know, you could still do this or you could still do that, I find that very insulting because, you know, I mean, they just really don't know. They really don't know whether, you know, they don't know your limitations unless you explain it to them. And even then, sometimes they still don't understand. The second one is not being accommodating and or wanting you to accommodate them instead. So this one is, you know, it can go for people that are, you know, not sick. For example, there's a lot of women that are like, you know, he's going to come out to me. He's going to, you know, and I kind of have that philosophy as well. A dude is going to come out to see me. I shouldn't have to drive all the way out to see him or meet him halfway, you know, kind of be a gentleman and come out to see me. The fact that I have a condition on top of that really makes it important that he can actually come out to see me. I also have an electric car. So if the guy is too far, I could probably get to where he is, but I can't, I may not make it back. So, you know, that's kind of one of my rules. He has to come out to see me for my safety. We meet in a neutral place during the day, and that's how it goes. I've had guys that are like, can you come out here? And I'm just like, no, I can't. I flat out will say, no, I can't do that. So, you know, and that to me is red flaggy, but also kind of like for a guy, it's like, you're not being a gentleman. You're not, you know, I know that some people have an issue with it. I know that we should just be equal, you know, meet me halfway, whatever. But it really does show kind of a lack of, you know, being a gentleman and being considerate. And so that's just one of my, you know, red flags. So kind of, I have some like sub points here. So not being accommodating, or wanting you to accommodate them also includes not understanding or denying your limitations. So if you go somewhere and they insist you don't need a wheelchair, you're walking, you're fine, you don't need a wheelchair. That's not understanding your limitations. Insisting on active dates like hiking. I put hiking, not biking, but both, you know, both would be active. You know, going hiking, playing pickleball, whatever, you know, wanting to do that kind of stuff. And you're just like, well, it says that I'm disabled on my profile. Like, what did you expect? Getting annoyed at your dietary restrictions and, you know, kind of rolling their eyes or something. Like if you're trying to order at a restaurant and you're just like, yeah, you know, can you make sure that it doesn't have this, this, and this? This stuff hasn't personally happened to me yet. It's happened to me within my family, to be honest. But it hasn't happened to me with a date yet because I also don't go out on dinner dates because my diet is so limited. I just kind of skip the dinner dates. Meet at a coffee shop. I'll just usually have some water. And that's just how it goes. That's just kind of the easiest thing for me. Rolling their eyes, sighing, or other signs of annoyance. So I had this happen to me once. There was a guy, this was a long time ago. I met this guy through Plenty of Fish, and we actually didn't go out on a date. He had a meetup group, and it was a board game group, and I talked to him. I said, you know, I have a limitation, but if you can accommodate that limitation, I would love to join your group. And he was like, yeah, I absolutely can. So basically, my issue is I have problems with fluorescent lighting. So this group met at his apartment, And so all I asked was the lights stay off while we were meeting together as a group. There was plenty of natural light, especially during the summer. So that wasn't like a huge issue. And he accommodated me just fine. It was interesting, though, that once he met a different girl, I was not interested in him. He was kind of a jerk. So I just lost interest in him. I really enjoyed the group, though, so I kept going. And he eventually met another girl. And I noticed that once he met this other girl, he was annoyed with me. And, you know, I think one time when I asked him about the lights, he kind of rolled his eyes at me. And that really bothered me. And I think I left like shortly after that. So, you know, I will be talking a little bit more about that in another point. But yeah, not being accommodating or wanting you to accommodate them, or suddenly them having a problem with accommodations that they used to provide for you. And that, you know, eye rolling and being disrespectful is just, that's bad in any situation. This third one is a bit confusing. Showing too much interest in your condition and not showing any interest at all. So this one is a hard one because I think if somebody shows a lot of interest, I did go on a date with a guy that I think he matched with me because I was chronically ill. He worked for a medical research company, and I think that was kind of the draw for him, was that I had a chronic condition, and that was sort of his area of interest. He was actually a programmer for this company, but I think he had some kind of a special interest in medicine because he worked around doctors and researchers. So when we met up, that was part of our conversation. That was, you know, he asked me a lot of questions, and then also he did a lot of the have you tried this test? Have you tried this test? Which I didn't mind. You know, I actually did try the test that he recommended. You know, so it was very interesting to have someone that was so interested in my condition. The problem is that it was a lot of our conversation. And I don't, you know, I will talk about my condition, but I also want to talk about other things. And so I kind of would switch the subject and, you know, ask him about him and that kind of thing. So, you know, I think there is a delicate balance. Now, I've had other guys that don't ask anything about it at all, which does concern me because we do have certain limitations. And you would think that people would know, like, oh, this person has a chronic illness, they have limitations. But I think for some people, it's just like, I don't care. You know, I don't care if you have limitations. We're going to do what we're going to do. And I'm not going to ask. I have an oxygen concentrator here in my apartment, and, you know, I get no questions, which I think is interesting. But at the same time, it's like, well, it might be a good thing. But, you know, I think there's a delicate balance. Showing some interest and being like, oh, you know, what's your condition? What are your limitations? And then just carrying on to other topics is probably best. You don't want your relationship to revolve around your illness, even if your illness does have to be accommodated in the relationship. This is also a two-way street. You shouldn't be talking endlessly about your condition if you're out on a date. That's a red flag on your part. And the person, like I said, should show some interest in order to be a suitable partner. So, like I said, it's a delicate balance. Number 4. This one is one that has happened a few times. And this one is a bit harder to detect. You have to be really careful with this one. Using your condition as leverage to gain your favor. So there are some guys, and actually some gals, some friends, that will use your illness and your condition to use it as leverage, or to use it to make themselves look better in your eyes. But that never lasts. And I'll give you some examples. So basically, they'll be very accommodating until they lose interest in you. And I just gave you guys an example with number 2, with the guy and the lights and, you know, in his apartment. So as soon as he lost interest, he was just like, I'm not doing this. This is annoying. Like, why do I, you know, he started rolling his eyes at me. But I also had a female friend. And I know that this is about dating, but this can also be a red flag in friendships. I had a female friend that was very nice, very accommodating. I remember one time I got kind of dizzy. We were out somewhere and I got kind of dizzy, and she was just like, oh my God. And she like found a chair for me to sit in. She was really, really nice until, you know, we kept hanging out, and little by little, she just was like, didn't care about my limitations, didn't care about my light sensitivity and all those problems. And eventually we had a pretty bad falling out. She yelled at me over something. And I was kind of at a point where my health was actually getting worse. So that friendship, I was like, this friendship just basically ran its course. And so I ended up ghosting her and just not talking to her anymore. But like I said, once they get comfortable with you, or once they're just like, all right, I accommodated you enough, now it's time for me to have a good time. You know, my illness didn't go away. So, you know, I don't understand why, you know, things would change, but you know, that's just always such a red flag. Whether it's a romantic interest or not. Pretending to be very caring and concerned. So this still goes under the umbrella of using your condition as leverage. So pretending to be very caring and concerned until they don't get what they want. So there was one guy that I met. Well, I never met him in person, but he was, you know, I met him off of social media, and he was just texting with me and acting like he was very interested in this and that. And he would even say like, well, what are your limitations and where can you go? He started acting like he was actually going to take me out on a date, like making it seem like he was going to ask me out on a date by asking me what I could and couldn't do. And he's like, oh, I could go and pick you up, and, you know, you don't have to drive out to me, because he lived really far. And I was just like, oh my God, like, really? You know, like I was like, this guy's great, you know? And I was like, are we doing this right now? Like, what's going on? You know, and as soon as I started kind of like planning, because I didn't know what he was talking about, he was just like, oh, no. Like, we're not, you know, we're not going anywhere. I eventually found out that he was married. And so he disappeared very fast after that. Basically, they just try to hook you by making themselves look like a Prince Charming. You know, I had another guy, he was actually a nurse, a guy that I went out on a date with. I actually had 2 dates with him last year, and he was actually a nurse. And, you know, he was very nice on the first date, you know, very sweet. You know, I think we were at a coffee shop, and I think somebody was smoking nearby, and he's like, is that bothering you? Like, is that, you know, are you okay? You know, I was like, yeah, you know, that kind of bothers me. He's like, we can move to another table. And he seemed very, very sweet. To be honest, out of all the guys that I dated, I liked him the most. And then several weeks later, over like a month and a half later, we went out on a second date, and he kind of pulled this thing. I could tell that, you know, he wanted to hook up, and, you know, he started saying like, oh, you know, I don't want to make things worse for you, because I know you're already going through so much. I don't want to make anything worse for you. And then started groping me, and, you know, insisted on kissing me. You know, I had already kind of like not wanted to kiss him, but I just kind of did it so he would stop, you know. So, I mean, my bad, you know, I shouldn't have done that, but, you know, acting like, you know, I don't want to make things worse for you, but because he wanted to get something from me. Once I said no, and I was like, you know, I decided to just come home. You know, he seemed like he kind of had an attitude about it, and I don't know, he seemed like he didn't want to see me again. So he really didn't care about my health. You know, he just was trying to use it to make himself look like a good guy. Now, right now that I talked about this guy, so these are just, you know, four big ones that I noticed. I'm sure that there's plenty more out there. There is another one, and I don't want to, this one is kind of a rough one, because I don't want to discredit anybody that's sick out there. This gentleman, the one that I was talking about, the nurse, he said that he had lymphoma. I don't know how true the story was. I feel like there are some guys out there, and maybe some women as well, but right now I'm talking about guys because I date guys. I do believe that there are some guys out there that will lie about having a condition, and just to sort of, again, gain your favor. Like, oh, I also went through something like this. According to him, he had lymphoma when he was a teenager, and that's what inspired him to become a nurse. I want to say that he told me this story on both dates, the first date and the second date. I want to say that the age changed on each date, but I can't remember entirely. That was his story. I feel like I've met other guys through social media that have also said things like that they've had cancer. or that they had a wife that had cancer and she died. And, you know, I remember there was one guy that I met through a dating app that insisted, you know, he had a wife with cancer. And, you know, and I was like, why would you want to date another sick person? And he just got very extremely angry. It was just weird. And I feel like this has happened a few times. This is the first time it's happened to me with a guy that I've actually met in person. There was another guy that told me that he had some kind of like sinus condition. That's, you know, that wasn't, I feel like that's kind of not the same thing. But usually, you know, I feel like, I can't say that this is a red flag. He could have had lymphoma. It could be true. But I would exercise a lot of caution if you're going out on a date, or if you meet someone and they say, you know, and you tell them about your condition and they say, oh, you know, I had something really bad too, or I had cancer at one point and I got better, or I had this illness, or I had a spouse that had an illness. Does it happen? Yeah, I'm sure that there are people out there that have, you know, that have been with someone with an illness and they're out on the dating scene again, or they've had an illness and they're out on the dating scene, you know, after overcoming their illness. It just seems very coincidental if I'm sick and suddenly they were also sick and they had this horrible disease. This one is just, it's going to have to be up to your own judgment. I think the best way to get a good gauge on this is if you go on multiple dates and you ask them to tell the story again and to see if there are any inconsistencies in the story. So I'm not really counting this one as a number 5. This is just something to look out for, because this would only happen to a chronically ill person. I don't think that guys are out there lying about having cancer to a woman that they're, you know, that's perfectly healthy. I think for whatever reason, when you tell someone that you're sick, they feel that they may gain your favor or your sympathy more, or that they'll gain, or they'll become closer to you or trust you more because they also had an illness. And so, like I said, this one is a tough one because you never know. And you also don't want to tell somebody like, oh, you're lying to me that you had cancer, and they end up having, you know, it ends up being true. But that's one of the things that you have to be very careful of. If you have a chronic condition, if they claim that they had an illness or they had something, I would just be very, very cautious about that, and just ask them, you know, maybe 2 dates down the line, ask them again, like, oh, you know, remember, you know, you were also sick. You know what it's like to be sick. And then just see what they say. It's a horrible thing to do. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Anybody that lies about having cancer or having a serious illness is just, that's the most awful thing. And I actually thought about it with this guy. Like, if I had hooked up with him, or if I had taken it further with this guy and then later on found out that he was lying about having cancer. I have a nephew that had leukemia. So this is kind of, you know, I know the suffering that people go through with a family member that has cancer. I don't know why anybody would lie about that, but people do. And people do lie about it. There are people out there that do not have a conscience. And I don't know why they do it. But anyways, if you guys have any other red flags that you have seen, you know, as a chronically ill person, please leave them down in the comments. That way we can all help each other. I couldn't think of any more. These were the big ones that came to my mind. But, you know, I'll have to talk about dating more in another video, some of my experiences. But thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.